Bismillah. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, everyone. This is our first conversation in the Beauty in Solitude series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aisha Imam, and I'm the director of Reed Society for the Sacred Arts, a 501c3 art organization based in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Reed Society strives to preserve and promote sacred art and music that is anchored on a master-student relationship. Shortly after the pandemic hit, Reed Society was able to pivot quickly to the virtual world and, in collaboration with the Walters Art Museum, curated an online exhibition titled Beauty in Solitude. If you have not checked out the exhibition, please do so and take your time. I especially urge aspiring artists and especially calligraphers to take their time and look at all the parts and the pieces of this exhibition. One of the things that each calligrapher spent a lot of time sharing their studio space, their thoughts on the pandemic and how they work in solitude and how solitude is as a companion to all of their works. We also have audio links in this exhibition, and it really captured the spirit of a lot of calligraphers, especially when I heard Mohamed Zakariya's link. I was especially moved. His voice captures the spirit of his work and his unique attitude towards Ottoman calligraphy. And special thanks and welcome to Hoja Zakariya, Hoja Aisha Holland, Hoja Nihad, and Hoja Khalid, who I did see register for this event. Now, on our guests. When I approached the Walters Art Museum, they connected me to Dr. Ashley Dimmig. After hearing my ideas, she graciously and enthusiastically agreed to this project. I follow the Walters Art Museum and I attend a lot of their talks online. And shortly after we went live with this exhibition, I was following her and I listened to a talk that she held on Turkish textiles. And I realized, it was like an aha moment, I realized that she started her journey at the loom. And maybe it was this understanding of the art of weaving that when she was listening to me pitch all these ideas, at that time it was just ideas, it wasn't a solid, exhibition per se, she was able to go with it. And combined with this background and her intense scholarship, her contribution to Beauty in Solitude was vital. Dr. Ashley Dimmig is currently the Wheeler Mellon Postdoctoral Curatorial Fellow in Islamic Art at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. Her fields of specialization include a range of art and architecture from Turkish and Persian spheres in the early modern and modern periods. With a fine arts background in fiber arts and weaving, Dr. Dimmig is especially interested in textiles across the Islamic world. Dr. Dimmig completed her PhD at the University of Michigan in 2019 and also holds 2 Master of Art degrees from Indiana University Bloomington and Koç University in Istanbul, as well as a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the Kansas City Art Institute. The other scholar and guest today is someone who I'm very honored to consider a friend. Dr. Emin Lelic is also an aspiring calligrapher with Hoja Mohamed Zakariya, as well as a board member of Reed Society. Dr. Lelic is an assistant professor of Middle Eastern history at Salisbury University in Maryland. He received his PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations from the University of Chicago, where he defended his dissertation on science in the early modern Ottoman Empire. He's currently working on a monograph, tentatively titled A Window into the Soul of an Empire, Ottoman Physiognomy. His interests include Ottoman and Islamic history, art, literature, and science. The scholars will spend about 30 to 40 minutes bringing to life the connection between a folio housed at the Walters Art Museum by Seyh Hamdullah, often considered to be the father of Ottoman calligraphy, and a kitab by Hoja Mohamed Zakariya, a master calligrapher who single-handedly brought the art form to the United States. We welcome questions from all of you. Since there are so many attendees, we have almost 70 people registered. Please just use the question and answer space for questions as they arise. I'll record them and then I will share them with the scholars at the end of the program. We'll leave the chat function for private conversations among you. And again, this is the first of a series of dialogues that we'll be holding. So if you'd like to keep abreast of future events, please subscribe on our website, readsociety.co, or follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, for that introduction. It really has been a pleasure to work with you, and I'm really excited to talk today with Emin. So let me get the PowerPoint launched here, and we can get started. So one of the benefits to bringing together the historic calligraphies and the contemporary artist's work in this exhibition, Beauty and Solitude, not only shows the resonances across time and space, but allows us to foreground the people and their personalities behind the artwork. And I mean, I know you've been researching Ottoman calligraphers in biographical dictionaries. So I wonder if you could get us started by telling us some of the stories you've uncovered in your work.
Yes, sure. Before I begin, I would like to thank Aisha and Read Society for organizing this wonderful event, and Mohamed Zakariya, who I hear is watching, for his inspiration. And actually, you raise a very interesting and important point, which is that Ottoman calligraphers were keenly interested in their predecessors and contemporaries, as are, in fact, contemporary calligraphers. They like to know what other calligraphers are doing. Traditionally, this manifested in a whole literary genre referred to as biographical dictionaries. A number of such texts were written about Ottoman calligraphers and early Republican calligraphers. Sometimes these entries are amusing, like the calligrapher whose stomach was too large to properly hold the tablet on which he wrote, and consequently prevented him from becoming, according to his biographer, the greatest calligrapher of his age. Others are sad, like the calligrapher whose house and possessions were lost to a fire. Overall, I would add that they portray life in its multifaceted manifestations and show us that these were also people. This, of course, highlights your point that the personal dimension was deeply intertwined with the art. In other words, the art itself lived and flourished in a very particular ecosystem, as it were.
Absolutely. And so I think we can maybe dive in to look at specifically some stories about Seyh Hamdullah, and we can look at some pictures here of his work at the Walters while we hear some interesting stories about him.
Shaykh Hamdullah's biographical entries in the different dictionaries by different biographers are really a perfect illustration of the point I was trying to make earlier. They also provide a window into the worldview of Ottoman calligraphy. As I see it, his life is sort of framed around three major anecdotes. And here I'd like to add, what's interesting is that with time, these anecdotes get edited and oftentimes they get sanitized. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. The first anecdote that I'd like to mention, that generally appears at the beginning for obvious reasons, concerns the birth of Hamdullah. And it tells of his father as a young man, sort of walking down the street one day and thinking about marriage, that he should get married. And suddenly a saintly person appears in front of him. And this saintly person says, you have to go to this such and such neighborhood and marry this orphan daughter of such and such poor woman, which creates a lot of tensions because his father, they're from a very high scholarly family that's on a friendly basis with princes. And they've immigrated from Bukhara to Amasya at this point. But he's so impressed by the saintly appearance of this man that he immediately follows his command or advice, marries the young lady in question, and then again the man appears and says, you did well by following my advice immediately. In return, you're going to have a very gifted, extraordinary son who will be known in all the cities and all the lands, and his renown will extend to Judgment Day. And that, of course, is Hamdullah. and even tells him, you must name him Hamdullah. Now,
true, because we're still talking about him in the 21st century and in the Zoom blogosphere here.
yeah, sure, here we are talking about him, exactly.
Yep.
And all because of the prophecy. Now, the second anecdote I think is very interesting, and that gets omitted by later biographers or sanitized by actually a contemporary biographer, and it concerns the young Hamdullah before he quite becomes the big Shaykh and the big calligrapher. So his father at this point is a Shaykh of the Sohrawardiya, of the spiritual order, and he's very famous. And one day, a cavalry officer stops by the house asking to see the father because he'd like for him to write a charm for his greyhound, so that his greyhound, he likes to race his greyhound with the prince, and usually the prince's greyhound is faster and catches the rabbit faster, but he wants a magic charm to beat the prince's greyhound, and in return he's bringing him a nice succulent piece of meat that he wants to present as a gift. And Hamdullah is there and he sees the meat and he really would like to eat it himself, and his father isn't around, so he says, you know what, I can write it for you. I know how to do that. And so he says, okay, fine. He takes the meat and then writes something, and they put it on the greyhound's neck, and lo and behold, the greyhound actually beats Prince Bayezid's greyhound. The prince, who is already connected to the family and has been studying calligraphy with Hamdullah, sees the necklace and says, may I look at this? And he looks and he sees there's something written on it and actually recognizes Hamdullah's hand, but he laughs because on it is written a very funny, they call it in Ottoman, tekadleme, like a sort of silly rhyme, and roughly translated, it says, I desired his meat, so I wrote a charm for his dog. Whether or not his dog passes, may the dog's tail go up the owner's butt, or rear end, I should say. He uses the word, an even worse word than what I said in Turkish, which I think shows the salty humor.
Which I love stories about that. I mean, it's just funny, and people don't often appreciate the humor of people throughout history.
And I think even deeper, and I don't want to go into this, but just sort of as a quick side note, as I mentioned, a current biographer has left that out because it just is not considered appropriate to the modern audience in Turkey for some reason. Well, the third anecdote is really the most important anecdote, which concerns the invention of the script for which Seyh Hamdullah becomes famous. And one day he's sitting now with his old friend, Prince Bayezid, who's now Sultan, and they're sitting in the palace in Istanbul. And Bayezid asks him, what do you think about Yaqut al-Mustasimi, who was the great calligrapher in the 13th century in Baghdad, that really set the tone and determined the proportions that all calligraphers would follow after him in the 6 major scripts. And Seyh Hamdullah says, well, it's not that special, which one of the biographers calls presumptuous. That too is edited out later. But the Sultan is unhappy about this. And he says, well, he orders someone to bring out of the treasury the album or kitas by Yaqut al-Mustasimi, and says to Hamdullah, look at these, are you sure? He says, if you really think it's not that special, why don't you create something better? A tarz khas, a special style. Well, now he has to, his bluff has been called, I suppose, and or not really, because he delivers. He goes into seclusion for 40 days, which is a very important mystical number, and there are different versions of the story, but he meditates very hard on these texts and is copying them and trying to overcome them, improve upon them. And according to some, with sheer effort and genius, he does it. According to others, he just can't do it. And it's the prophet Khidr who appears to him during his seclusion and says, no, this is how you have to do it, Hamdullah. And with that, we see the emergence of what will become basically the Ottoman style of calligraphy, particularly in the Naskh or Nesik script.
That's great. I mean, so I hope that some of these short sort of tales give everyone a broader view of Seyh Hamdullah's personality and might shed new light on looking at his work. So I wanted to highlight here this album of calligraphy that is in the Walters Art Museum collections. So this is one of 3 known works by Seyh Hamdullah in institutions in the United States. The others are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and at the University of Michigan, where I received my PhD. So let's look more closely at this album, which is in an accordion format, as you can see here. And the texts feature excerpts from the Quran and Hadith. Most of the pages are in this Kitta format, as you mentioned, so this rectangular format with the use of 2 different sized scripts. But the frames then were added much later. So the texts themselves date to Seyh Hamdullah's lifetime. And then when the album was compiled in the 18th century, these decorative marbled borders were added. And another interesting feature that I find particularly aesthetically pleasing even is an example here on the right of these karalama pages. So these are pen exercises, and the word literally meaning blackening. So a calligrapher would continue to hone his craft over and over again, and quite often you'll see these kinds of pages of real clustered letters and forms included in albums like finished works, which I think is particularly interesting. We also have this accordion format, which is not unusual, but is interesting to think about how it was handled. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the history of calligraphy albums like this and how they were used and viewed.
Sure. Well, from what I understand, traditionally, a muraqqa fulfilled a very important crucial function, essentially as a portable teaching tool. And it was a type of study tool for calligraphers. They would study from it by learning to imitate it until they mastered it, as was apparent in that anecdote where a kitta, a tablet from this 13th century calligrapher was around and was kept in the palace in early 1500s. Shaykh Hamdullah put his work in some of his work was put like that in a paste book or album format. So precisely for that reason, so it could be passed around and studied, but also admired by other calligraphers and connoisseurs. And the two, I think, often overlapped. They were objects that were meant to be handled and examined and studied and meditated upon in close proximity. As such, they were rather intimate objects, traditionally viewed I think, in small groups.
And it's funny because it almost comes full circle at the Walters, because under normal circumstances, we do have classes and researchers visit the collection of the rare books and manuscripts in a really intimate space where they can not handle, but at least view these objects in close proximity. So in some ways, there is that learning aspect from the material object still today when it's in the collection at the Walters. Under our present circumstances, people can actually explore this manuscript and many others through the digital proxies on our website. So I've included the link here at the top, so you can look at all of the pages in great detail, as well as many hundreds of other manuscripts from the Islamic world and beyond. So please feel free to explore.
And I would second that and really encourage all those who are watching to take a look, and one day when things go back to some form of normal, if you can make it out to Baltimore to look at it, it's really phenomenal that these documents from or objects from the 15th, 16th century are here now.
No, it's really a pleasure and joy of my job to be able to see these things. So now that we've seen more of Seyh Hamdullah's work, do you want to continue to flesh out his personality for us a little bit? What really was he a master of in his day?
Sure. Well, he essentially initiated a new style of calligraphy, as I mentioned, which with time became dominant in the Ottoman cultural sphere, by which I mean not just the Ottoman Empire, but even beyond, down to the present time. essentially the people who are following the Ottoman school are practicing his style. Now, how did this one man do this? Well, it was a combination of factors, as always in history. First and foremost, just his undeniable talent and skill. In Ottoman, he was known as, by the biographers and calligraphers, he's known as the Qiblatul Kutab, the sort of the cynosure of calligraphers, the point to which all the calligraphers' eyes turn. The other reason was just his strong and extraordinary personality. Like that holy man predicted to Mustafa Dede Hamdullah's, Shaykh Hamdullah's father, Shaykh Hamdullah was really an extraordinary human being. Not only was he a master of calligraphy that influenced it and changed the proportions that are in a way that still people follow, but he was also a very accomplished, one of the most accomplished archers of his time. It's so much so that the famous Ok Meydanı in Istanbul today, still known by that name, is connected with his actions during Sultan Bayezid's time. But there's a connection here. Many calligraphers were interested in practiced archery because in order to be a good calligrapher, one of the essential ingredients was having a sort of strong, stable hand. Because if the hand was shaking, it was hard to execute these very fine ligatures precisely. But archery would help with that, to strengthen the hands. And to this day, many Turkish calligraphers are connected to archery.
And that always reminds me of how in our contemporary times, surgeons and doctors will strengthen their hands with knitting and other kinds of crafts, embroidery and that kind of thing. So I think that still has resonances today.
Well, what do you know? It's yeah. Well, and then okay, so he was a master archer, and as a matter of fact, the title Shaykh is not because he was spiritual master, but because he was the Shaykh of the archers. That's how he got the title. He was a master calligrapher. He was also a master tailor. He could sew robes that were just so phenomenal you couldn't even see where the seams were. So perfect, to the point that the palace would order garments from him. And he was also an athlete, a great athlete. The stories told that he could cross the Bosphorus swimming across. But one dictionary has this kind of embellished, almost comical story that he would see, the Sultan would come out on his balcony in Topkapi Palace and see Hamdullah cross in Üsküdar, and Hamdullah would take his wallet, according to some versions, or a piece of calligraphy and put it in his mouth and cross the Bosphorus swimming, and it wouldn't get wet. Which is quite a feat. I don't know if anyone of you have tried crossing the Bosphorus, but and then he was also a hunter, fantastic at hunting with falcons and hawks. So that's his personality. On top of that, doing all of these activities, he was also a very prolific calligrapher. He wrote numerous, I think 47 Qurans that he copied in his hands, many shorter texts, inscriptions on mosques, and albums like the one we have at the Walters Museum. And just to give you a sense, a Quran is a book that has, a few hundred pages, and it's an accomplishment for someone just to read it cover to cover, let alone copying out by hand 47 in beautiful, fantastic calligraphy, 47 copies. Furthermore, he came from a family of calligraphers, and many of his sons and grandsons became calligraphers. So he had a lot of students beyond his family as well, who propagated his style. And last but not least was his intimate connection to the imperial court, which endowed it with glamour and patronage. And I just want to add, all of this, it still wasn't really a foregone conclusion that his style would dominate. There were other calligraphers who thought that actually they should stick with Yaqut al-Mustasimi's style, but nonetheless, he persevered in the end with his style.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. But as we look forward in time a bit, and here we have a screenshot from the online exhibition, sort of formatted like a family tree, showing the connections from Seyh Hamdullah to present day contemporary artists. So if we want to zoom out a little bit and look at the role of calligraphy in the Ottoman Empire and then as it transitioned into the Turkish Republic.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, calligraphy really flourished in the Ottoman Empire. And this makes sense simply from a functional point of view, because legible writing was essential for the functioning of a major empire, which required a robust administrative bureaucracy. And the Ottoman Empire extended over thousands of miles and covered 3 continents. So you needed a big class of administrators who could communicate with each other in a legible script. And some of the scripts that were developed during the Ottoman period, I think this is a very interesting sort of story, is the treasury had its own very complex script that's very difficult to read, but almost impossible to imitate, extremely difficult. And that was for a reason, to prevent forgeries in treasury books. Only people who were trained in it could actually write in it that way. Another story that illustrates the strength and widespread nature of calligraphy is it was in part the strong calligraphic lobby in the early modern Ottoman Empire that was against the printing press. And they were able to prevent its establishment. Not only they, but they were a major force in preventing it in the empire until the early 18th century, because many of them feared they would be out of a job. A lot of them made their living by copying out texts in books. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, moving away from the purely functional aspect, calligraphy also had the capacity for being a true art form with a very profound aesthetic dimension. And many dedicated their lives to mastering that art form. Those who succeeded earned a place in the Biographical dictionary. Something most interesting and consequential occurred with the end of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the Turkish Republic following World War I that sort of turned the whole world of calligraphy upside down. The Republic changed its official script from Arabic to Latin as part of a modernization process. So everything Islamic, including the Arabic script, was suddenly considered backward, while everything European, including the Latin script, was considered modern. This also meant that calligraphy, which was done in Arabic script and deeply rooted in Islamic tradition, suddenly became démodé. It was a difficult time for calligraphers. In fact, the art barely survived in a way through the heroic efforts of a few master calligraphers who worked hard to pass it on, and also through some master calligraphers who just went around the old neighborhoods of Istanbul collecting calligraphy that now families were just throwing out because it was left over from their grandfather who may have been a calligrapher or collector, and it didn't have value anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of changing priorities and aesthetics and sort of the cycles that goes through over time. But thinking about the progression of time and these generations, how can we then connect 15th century Amasya in Istanbul to 21st century Baltimore and Washington, D.C.?
It's funny that you asked, but actually one of the students that studied with these masters who carried on the art in Istanbul was Mohamed Zakariya. Originally from California, he had found his way to the Middle East as a young man and eventually into the circle of the greatest Turkish calligraphers who became his teachers. After learning and mastering the major scripts and receiving the requisite certifications from his teachers, he came back to the United States and set up shop in DC, where he's been teaching Americans and Europeans calligraphy for decades now. Now, I'd like to add that one of the distinguishing qualities of Mohamed Zakariya is that he has gone beyond mastery of the technicalities of calligraphy itself. He has immersed himself in the culture that produced and sustained calligraphy for centuries. In other words, he did something that was actually extremely difficult. He learned Arabic and Ottoman very well, and he avidly reads Ottoman and Arabic texts, both those related to calligraphy, such as the biographical dictionaries of calligraphers, treatises on calligraphy, but also far beyond. And I'd like to tell a personal anecdote here. We were first introduced at Aisha Imam's house, who was hosting a party for calligraphers, because he was having learned that I read Ottoman, he was keen to discuss the translation of a 16th century Ottoman couplet, which he came across in an Ottoman commentary on the Quran, early Turkish commentary on the Quran. But he was so attracted to it that he was considering putting it into calligraphy, which to me was really fantastic, because that someone was still reading this kind of poetry in the original language, which is very difficult. So interestingly, now with this connection through Ashley and yourself and the Walters Museum, this a very fortuitous confluence, to me at least, has come to light, which has in large part motivated this particular conversation. That there is on the one hand a living calligraphic ecosystem, as it were, in the Mid-Atlantic region, centered around DC and Mohamed Zakariya and students. And on the other hand, there is this set of calligraphy pieces by the greatest master of Ottoman calligraphy at the Walters Museum, at the Walters Art Museum.
I know it's really fortuitous, as you say, and I think almost poetic, the way that this comes full circle and brings together the historical works and contemporary practices. And I know in my work, I mean, that's something I really enjoy hearing about, is when, you know, I study historical art, but when contemporary artists respond to historical works, I find that really rewarding and interesting. So maybe we can hear a little bit more about what you've learned from Mohamed Zakariya.
Yes, I've learned a lot from Mohamed Zakariya. First and foremost, I would say patience and perseverance. As you can see, I believe in the image, essentially the way calligraphy is traditionally taught is that the teacher writes out a sample, which the student learns by copying, and then prepares his best copy for the next class, where the teacher corrects it with red ink, and so it goes on until the student is capable of executing the assigned calligraphic ligatures to the teacher's satisfaction. Sometimes what appears to be a simple and rudimentary ligature, when executed by his hand, takes dozens or hundreds of tries until I, at least, can get it close. But everyone moves at their own pace. When the student has finally mastered the lesson, and first writing single letters, then combinations, then words, then sentences, by tradition, the teacher writes out a long, drawn out, it's the letter C, but it looks like an infinity sign, as my friend Majid said it, which actually stands for the word Seyh in Ottoman or Arabic, which means perseverance. So you've passed this lesson, that's what it means. Now persevere, go on, there's a lot more to learn. And thus one is always reminded of this fundamental principle of patience and perseverance. But I also learned from Mohamed Zakariya that the traditional way of studying calligraphy, or any other craft or art, I think, traditionally, is built on a sort of a apprenticeship. So one spends a lot of time with the teacher, watching him correct calligraphic exercises, drinking tea with him, playing with his cat Monty. And what emerges with time, through both directed and random comments and opinions that are variously articulated, goes beyond the art of technical calligraphic skills and includes, it's a training on viewing calligraphy and developing an eye for beauty, I would say.
I think that's really important too, because as we are trying to do with this exhibition and this series of conversations, is to really look at the many facets of how we can appreciate this art form. So not just the meaning of the texts, but its resonances across time and place, the materials, techniques, relationships, personalities. There's so many different things really embedded in the work itself, whether historical or contemporary. And so I do hope this sort of brief but rich dive into the art of calligraphy demonstrates its cultural and artistic significance. I mean, especially in our contemporary moment. So I wondered if you want to finish with final thoughts and looking into this particular work.
Yes, sure. I would add, since it's been mentioned by you, and that the beauty really, I think, has the capacity to lift people up, which was well demonstrated by Reed Society's Beauty in Solitude project, which came like a bomb during these difficult times. as you mentioned, there's also content to Ottoman and Islamic calligraphy. For example, this piece here by Mohamed Zakariya, which says, Buddha Gecher, Yahoo, is not easily translated, but amounts to something along the lines of this too shall pass, O Lord. And this was, according to legend, inscribed on Solomon's ring, which gave him power over all living beings. This is very interesting because the Solomonic legend, the legend of Prophet Suleiman from the Quran, was a favorite topic of Ottoman writers. They wrote about it a lot, and excuse me. One of the underlying themes in these stories of Prophet Suleiman or Solomon is the cyclical nature of time, that everything changes, which in turn connects it obviously to this phrase. And this phrase also is particularly connected to a very difficult time for the city of Istanbul. According to Istanbul calligraphers, this phrase became very popular during the Allied occupation following World War I, which was very, very heavy-handed on on the Ottomans and caused immense anxiety. The future of the empire and everything really was completely uncertain. So the calligraphers began to write, Buddha Gecher, Yahoo. This too shall pass. And it was like a tranquilizer that helped to calm people down. It became very, very popular, and most calligraphers did at least one version, some many.
I think that's a beautiful, really perfect way to wrap up this conversation, which is like the cycles of time, just merely the first iteration of the series of talks that will be related to the Beauty and Solitude exhibition. So I think we can take a few questions from the audience.
Thank you, Emin. Thank you, Ashley. I need to spend a few minutes thanking both of them because it's an hour for the people who attended, but it's been hours prior in preparation. We did a dry run yesterday. It was fantastic. I actually enjoyed watching it the second time as well. So if you ask my opinion, I think that you guys had very good content. It's important content to share. You're both very unique in your fields, and I'm very grateful to you. So thank you. We had an interesting comment in the chat box, and if I'm not mistaken, it is also by someone who is an Ottomanist, I believe. He says, let me add something. The biographies of Ottoman calligraphies were not simply biographies written to immemorialize their lives, but also part of the larger tabakat literature aimed at teaching the new generations on how to be a good person. They were part of the process of instilling good conduct. And even just as being an amateur student with Hoja Mohamed Zakariya, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Lelic, what do you think? I think that he's made that in a certain way clear through his stories that he shares, that there are many things to take away from these stories that have been written in the past.
Yeah, I think this is quite correct. It was something that was also meant as a way to advise people. And we know calligraphers didn't invent the genre. The genre obviously goes back to very early Islamic history, where they started recording the people who were transmitting hadith, because you needed to know the character of the person who was transmitting the hadith, and then it spread, and then we started seeing biographical dictionaries of poets, and of course of calligraphers as well. Yeah, it was about good conduct, but also I think just about life.
Right, and the breath of life, like everything, including this kitchen sink, is thrown in there because it's life, and it's not just a piece of art, but there's a lot involved in these people's lives. We had a question, as a visual art, what is the importance of knowing the languages in which a calligrapher is writing? Are interpretations or English translations enough? Yeah. Now I say yeah because I am also slowly but surely trying to learn Arabic. And when I learn Arabic, I realize there's a richness to it that if I didn't try, I wouldn't even pick up those few little bits. So I can imagine what both of you might might add to the discussion.
I mean, I think, certainly knowing the nuances of the words and phrases and their cultural context certainly adds a new layer, but that's not to say that someone can't enjoy these without, studying Arabic for many years. So, when I teach students or give tours in the galleries, I do find that sometimes it's a bit of a stumbling block that they think that because they don't know the language, they can't appreciate the art. And I try to break down that misconception, and that there are other aspects. And we've talked about the various ways that the works can be appreciated. So I think it's a yes and, not an either or.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I think perhaps it might be useful to think of it in terms of layers. So there's one layer, which is one tabakat, which is with tabakat, yeah, which is the style, the pure artistic style, which one the technicality of writing, which one can learn without knowing the language. It's just a matter of motor skills, really, and putting an eye to it. But then there's another layer, which is the content of it, and I think knowing that enriches the experience immensely. Knowing what it means and what it's saying. That being said, it's also, those languages are not easy to learn. I'll be the first to admit, I spent many years trying to learn them, and I'm still learning them. So, and we live in these people, like Seyh Hamdullah, he grew up in a family of scholars, and he learned all this stuff as a kid. But and like that in the Ottoman Empire, but we live in a completely different environment where it's not natural, to grow up learning Arabic and Ottoman, especially.
Right. Yeah.
You have to really put in an concerted effort to either go to the Middle East or go to university, and only a few universities have it to learn those languages as well.
That's
So
right.
it's not, it's difficult. It's very difficult. And if I may, I did want to add something about the earlier question that came to mind.
That's right.
As I mentioned, some of these biographical dictionaries were editing what others had written. So it was very interesting that later editions took out this comment that Shaykh Hamdullah was being presumptuous because they thought they wanted to present him. They didn't want him to present him as an arrogant person, and they took that out. And then another person who wrote a biographical dictionary of calligraphers, which was Mustafa Ali, the Menakib Huner, he says people are just not clever. They don't know how to appreciate art. This is very interesting. This is in 16th century Ottoman Empire, which is supposed to be the golden age. These people don't know. They're being sold this useless stuff that's being presented as real calligraphy. So I'm going to write this book and tell them what calligraphy. So he's teaching them, or so he says, how to evaluate calligraphy in this biographical dictionary.
That's so funny that they just took it out. All right, we're having a lot of questions. There's somebody who also added something interesting, which struck me because, yeah, like, actually I can't seem to go back up, but the visual aspect of a piece of art is its own language. Someone said that. They said, the mathematics of proportion and all of that, what's being put in is its own language. So there is another aspect to that. As you said, there are different layers. We have another question asking, would you be able to recommend books or online resources to learn more about Ottoman calligraphers? And let me say one more question before it gets away. Dr. Lelic, in the past year, have you learned anything about yourself through the process of practicing calligraphy?
Good question.
Can we get back to the last one so I can think about it?
Sure. Should I repeat it?
No, Ashley, would you like to answer any of them, or?
I know. I forgot the first one.
Books. Online recommendations, resources for the calligraphers. Or, I mean, I would like to mention again, to be able to take a look at the folio at the Walters. I think that's really special.
On the website, I think I even gave some sources for further reading.
Oh, okay.
Please check out the Beauty and Solitude website. And I mean, there are plenty of, I mean, a lot of books are coming to mind. I'm happy to share a bibliography if that helps, but yeah, start with what's cited on the website and build from there, I suppose.
Yeah, I would also reiterate that the website, and Mohamed Zakariya's website, has also some of the things he has written on calligraphy.
Mm-hmm.
And also there is the translation that he did, actually you wouldn't know this, it's at your house, Ur Derman's work, correct? Or he and Ur Derman participated?
That's right, that's right. He translated to English.
Yeah, into English. Do you remember the title of that book?
Oh, no.
Well, okay, we can post it later.
Yes, I'd be happy to post it. I'll post it on our Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Ashley, you have, I think, on your website, one of the texts is the Menakib Hüner Veran, which has been translated into English not so long ago. Mm-hmm. So you can, it's called, what's the English, Ashley, for that? The anyway, it's on the website.
It's on the website.
Yeah. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday, 6 o'clock on a Friday. So no stress, guys.
We're happy to share some of these sources through the Instagram if people are interested. Absolutely.
Okay, we'll definitely do that, everyone. There's one really interesting comment here. Any influence that might have come from other cultures to the art form at this time, non-Arabic speaking or possibly Christian peers, or if any influence exchanges they might have had regarding the specific art form? I don't know. I
mean, generally, this is going to be a very vague answer, but generally speaking, nothing exists in a vacuum.
Right.
There are always cross currents, influences, and it's so much more complex than a linear sort of trajectory of one thing changing into the next. But these are coming out of an Istanbul that is quite heterogeneous, and so there are also sort of multiple cultures layered within the Ottoman spheres as well. So yeah, I think that the answer to that is always yes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry, I'm interjecting, but I totally agree. Anything about life is a yes. And we are always learning from one another, even when it's the smallest thing. And if Istanbul was Istanbul as it is now, of course, it's back and forth. And I think the biographies also almost indicate that. They weren't people that just locked themselves in one room and kept writing. It was a very rich life that they were taking part in. And wow, we're getting a lot. Mohamed Zakariya Hoja has mentioned the books that he translated from Turkish, and he's written it in the chat, so please do take a look. This is an interesting question. What do you find to be the binding personality traits among all calligraphers throughout history and current time?
I mean, not that I'm a calligrapher, but I wanted to give your answer of this perseverance. I mean, if that's truly a part of it, and learning the language and learning, I think that would probably be it.
Agreed. What do you think?
Yeah, well, to answer the question that was posed to me earlier, yeah, that's really what I learned: patience and perseverance, and to go back also to how I described the environment in which all of this happens with the teacher. That too involves patience, you know, and I believe one of the things that he told me once was that one of his teachers in Istanbul said, well, you know, when your students come, teach them how to drink Turkish tea. That's the start. And a lot of people do that. I know, I've heard stories that sheikhs who came from the Middle East to America, when people came to sit with them, they just taught them how to just sit and drink tea.
Right.
Because, and this is kind of deep, I think, because you're learning a lot, you're learning how to be patient and kind of wait things out, and then things come up in conversation slowly, sometimes spontaneously. The teacher gets inspired, or the student, and something evolves out of that. But in order for you to get to that point, we have to sort of step away from the instant gratification of our cell phones and social media, and just be able to sit. And then that extends to being able to just sit with your calligraphy and copying it over and over and over and over again until you get something out of it.
That's right. That's right.
Should we take maybe one more question?
Yeah, I think one is good. Let's see. What specific changes did Shaykh Hamdullah make to the writing style of Yaqut? That's, what would you say?
I would say, and you know, don't hold me to this. I'm just beginning calligraphy, so you know, I could say more about reading Ottoman texts, but about calligraphers. But from what I understand, and shall be corrected in the comments section as I speak. But from what I understand is that he improved the proportions of the letters to each other.
Mm.
And this, whereas Yaqut al-Mustasimi had the letters were perfect in and of themselves, but Shaykh Hamdullah improved the way the harmony as they all came together to form words and sentences.
I think that's a fair response. I don't think it's pretty diplomatic too. I don't think. Anyway, well, we're going to wrap up now. And again, I thank Dr. Lelic, Dr. Dimmig, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for all your time and your effort and your expertise. And it's just been a complete pleasure working with both of you and sharing your knowledge with our community. And I thank all the participants who came and attended. Thank you so much. Please continue following us on Instagram, or just subscribe on our website, readsociety.co. We do hope to continue doing these dialogues with various institutions and practicing calligraphers going forward. So again, many thanks. Thank you. Continue, you know, our artistic art endeavors, and hope to see you at our next talk.
Thank you both, Aisha and Ashley. This has really been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot. And thank you to the audience for your wonderful and thoughtful questions and comments.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.